Alright, in this video I'm going to give you an introduction to Microsoft Azure Batch service. So what is the Azure Batch service? It's multiprocessing as a service. So what does multiprocessing mean? Well, let's take YouTube as an example. Every minute 500 videos are uploaded to YouTube. And so if you've uploaded videos to YouTube, you know that they have to create a scaled down version, an SD version of the video. And so 500 videos a minute, that's a lot of videos to process. And so you can't do that on a single compute node. That would not work. You want to keep the users happy and provide an acceptable level of service there. So what you would do is you would distribute those videos processing amongst many compute nodes. And that's what multiprocessing is. Taking a task that involves a lot of work and breaking it up into pieces and sending those little pieces to individual nodes so that they can be run in parallel. Okay, Azure Batch is optimized for embarrassingly parallel workloads, and this means that each task is independent. So when you're processing a video, it doesn't matter what video you processed before. Each video processing operation is independent of all others. And what's also important is that the compute nodes don't have to talk to each other. There's no shared state or anything like that. So they're loosely coupled. And when you have that, that's what we call embarrassingly parallel workload. You can work with tightly coupled workloads in Azure Batch, but I'm not going to go over that in this video. So now let's go over the components and workflow. So the first thing you have to do is you need to upload files and applications to an Azure storage account. In the case of the YouTube example, the files would be the videos that the users are uploading. And the application would be the application that actually does the video processing, scales down the video from HD to SD. Okay, so the files and the application binaries themselves have to be uploaded to an Azure storage account. So step 2 here at the bottom is now we have to create a pool. And so we have an Azure Batch account, which represents our Azure Batch service, and there's a batch pool. And a batch pool is a collection of compute nodes. Okay, step 3 is we now have to create a job and tasks. A job is a bunch of tasks, and a task is the operation that you want to perform on the compute node. So in the YouTube example, the task would be, hey, run this application. The application receives the file, processes that file, and writes the scaled down video file to the Azure storage account. Okay, so this is just a task. The batch task is just the task definition. We're not actually running anything yet because we have some more things to do. Okay, so now in step 4, when we are ready to get this whole thing, multiprocessing thing going, we need to download the input files and applications to the compute nodes. So the application, in this case the video processing app, has to be downloaded to each individual compute nodes. You could have 100 nodes running here, and so you have to have the application on all 100 nodes, right? And so the Azure Batch account manages that for us. And then the input files would be the videos. And so the Azure Batch manages getting the input files and distributing them amongst the compute nodes as well. So the task of divvying up the work amongst the nodes, the hard part, is done by Azure Batch. Okay, and then step 5 is you upload the task output. So in the case of the YouTube example, the task output would be the scaled down video, the SD version, and that SD version can be uploaded to an Azure storage account. You don't have to have output files. Your task could just as easily do something like send a message to Event Hub. And that's what I'm going to demonstrate in the demo. And here's an overview of the demo. So in this demo, we have our input files, which are 1,000 files containing a varying number of words. Okay, and so what is the job going to do? Well, the job will create a task per file. And so for every file, we're going to run a .NET Console app, which counts the words and sends the count as a message to an Azure Event Hub. Very simple. And you can do it on your own at this GitHub repository. Just fork it, clone it, and then you can follow the steps in the README. I've worked hard to make it very turnkey, so it should work without any issues. And needless to say, if you want to do the demo at home, you have to have an Azure subscription. All right, so let me explain the demo because there's a lot of moving parts to it. So we do have bicep files, and the bicep files will create the Azure resources. So it'll create a storage count and an input file container that will receive the files with the words in them. It'll create a batch count, and it'll create an Event Hub namespace and Event Hub, which the application will write the word counts to. We have a couple PowerShell scripts to upload the text files to the input file container, and then upload the console app and its binaries to the batch count. And then finally, we have a web API, which we'll use to create the batch pool, job, and tasks, and it runs in a Docker container. Okay, let's do the demo. Okay, I have my repository root folder open in Visual Studio Code and the README file open, and I'm just going to go through the README from start to finish. Okay, so the first step is to create the Azure resources, and to do that, we open deploy.ps1, and we have to change the location. I'm going to do West US 2, save the file. Then we have to go to our parameters.json and provide a prefix for all our resources. And I'm just going to say fmyt and save that file. And then we just run deploy.ps1. And the resource creation will take 5-10 minutes, so I'm going to pause the video and resume when the resources have been created. Okay, the deployment script is completed and it was successful. So there is an output section here that has things like batch count names, keys. So you will need these values for subsequent steps in the demo, so do not clear this output. Better yet, just copy this deployment output section to Notepad so that you have it for later reference. All right, so now let's go to the Azure portal and see what resources have been created. So here's my FMYT resource group. So we have 3 resources: the Event Hub namespace, our batch count, and our storage count. So if we look at our storage count, we see that we have our input container. And then if we go to our batch account, we can see that it is configured to use that storage count that we just saw. All right, so let's proceed with the demo. Let's see what else we have to do in the README. Let's close these files. All right, now we have to upload the text files to Azure Batch count storage. Okay, so the first thing is open a PowerShell session and open upload files.ps1. And here we have to specify our storage count name and storage count key. So this is where we are going to upload those 1,000 files to. So that is under the deployment outputs, storage deployment connection string. So just pick the values out of there. And I'm not worried about showing you my account keys because I'm going to delete these resources after I'm done with this video. All right, save the file. And now I'm going to open a new terminal and run upload files.ps1. And again, I'm going to pause the video and resume when the files have been uploaded. All right, the files have been uploaded. So let's verify that by checking the container in the portal. So I'll go to my storage count, containers, and input. And yes, we can see we have our files there, so that's good. Okay, next step. Upload the word counter app to Azure Batch count storage. Okay, so now we have to take our word count app, which is our .NET framework application that will run on each of the compute nodes, and it will take in a file and count the words and then create a message with the word count and send it to the Azure Event Hub. And so the application's binaries have to be uploaded to batch count storage so that when Azure Batch Service has to run a word count task, it can install that application on each of the compute nodes so that it's ready to do work. Okay, so let's open upload word counter.ps1. And here we need to specify our batch count name, which is in our outputs. This is the account name. And then the resource group name. All right. One thing about okay, so what this script does, it first does a .NET publish, and then zips the binaries up, and then uploads the application to the Azure Batch service. Although each of the compute nodes are going to be running Windows Server, it does not have the .NET runtime installed. Now you can install the .NET runtime on the compute nodes, but it's much easier to publish your application as a self-contained application so that all the framework dependencies are bundled with your application. This makes the application larger, but it saves you the headache of having to install the .NET runtime on the compute nodes. So if you're running a .NET console app with Azure Batch Service, just publish it as a self-contained file, self-contained application. It'll just make your life a lot easier. Okay, so we've saved it. Now we can just run that. So you can see all the files that are going to be zipped up and uploaded. And wc.exe is our word counter application executable. Okay, so that's done. So let's now go to our batch account in the portal, or actually our storage account, and go to the containers, and we see we have a new container. So this is the container that was created by the batch service, and this container has this file here, which is actually the zip file we uploaded. It's about 30 megabytes in size. And latest is the label that it put on there. So the latest is the default label. And so you can have different versions of an application. And when you create a batch pool, you can say, hey, I want a particular version of an application installed on the compute nodes. But in this case, we just have one version. So it's called latest. Okay, next up is run the API. Okay, so now we have to create our batch pool and then the job and the tasks. And although you can do it with the CLI, it's much easier and you have more flexibility if you use the Azure Batch SDKs to do this step. And so I am going to demonstrate that through a web API that I wrote, and you can run that via Docker Compose. So let's do that. So we just have to open the Docker Compose YAML file. It's in the Docker folder, and we have on lines 10 through 14, we have to specify these values. So the first one is the endpoint URI for Azure Batch account. And again, if I go back to my deployment outputs, batch count deployment section here, endpoint URL. So that is that value there. Oops. Okay, and then the Azure Batch count name. All right, and then the account key, which is here under batch account deployment key. All right, now the storage configuration. Now the Azure storage account name. So again, it's under the storage deployment part. Account name is in the connection string. Whoops, not copy it right. Okay, and then the account key. All right, save the file. And now we just have to run the run container.ps1. Okay, and now we just have to open the Swagger page. Make sure it's up and running. All right, cool, we're there. Okay, so now let's create our batch pool, and recall the batch pool is basically specifying how many compute nodes you want to run and what applications are going to be installed in each node. So I have this post endpoint, and then this is the JSON for that. Actually, let me go back to the README. Yes, so the really important parameters here are the target dedicated compute nodes, and this is how many compute nodes you want in your pool. In this case, it's going to be 3, so there'll be 3 nodes running. So 3 nodes will be working on those 1,000 files, and hopefully they should be distributed pretty evenly. You can have hundreds of compute nodes, right? If you have huge tasks that you have to finish. As I said before, each of the image reference configuration is what operating system are you going to run on each node. In this case, it's Windows Server. And then the VM configuration, these compute nodes are just Azure virtual machines. And then the other important thing here is the application packages section, which says which applications you want running on those compute nodes. In this case, it's our WC app, which we uploaded earlier. And then the version here, as I said, which is latest. Okay, so I'm just going to copy this JSON and put it in the Swagger. We get a 202, which means it's good. So let's go back to the portal. And then if we go to our batch count, and then look at pools, we'll see our pool here, and it's right now, it has 0 nodes, but it's configured for 3, and we can see it's resizing. So right now it's allocating those 3 compute nodes. So this will take a few minutes as well. So I'm going to pause the video, and when all 3 nodes are running, I will resume, and we'll continue with the demo. All right, now our batch pool is in a steady state, and we can see here it has 3 nodes configured. Okay, next step. Now we have to create a batch job, and the batch job is a very simple JSON payload. Just specify the job ID and the pool ID. We'll just put that, and it's in post to the jobs endpoint. That's good. And now we have to create the batch tasks, the job tasks. And so there's this post jobs, job ID, tasks operation. Okay, so the important things in here are the Event Hub connection string, Event Hub name, the input container name. These are app settings. Basically, this is how you can provide settings, parameters to your application. And so the application will basically read these off of the command line, and that's how it'll know where to route the messages to and where to get the input files from. And then also you have to specify which application to run, obviously. In this case, it's our WC application. Right, so the values for the Event Hub connection string are in that deployment outputs JSON. All right, so let's go here, try it out. And the job ID would be WC job. And let me go get that Event Hub connection string. And it's under Event Hub deployment in this connection string here. Let's execute that. And we got a 202. Okay, so now I'm back to the batch count jobs section, and we can see our list of tasks. And we can see that so far we have some already completed. And so refresh that, and you can see 104 out of 1,000 have completed successfully. And so that's good. So it's going to take several minutes for all 1,000 tasks to be completed. So I'm going to once again pause the video, and when these tasks are complete, I will resume. All right, all our 1,000 tasks have completed successfully. So let's go look at some useful diagnostic features that you have here. So I'm going to click on one of these tasks. And you can see that there's a standard error.txt and a standard out. So my console app does console.writeLines, and so this will appear in the standard out.txt. And you can see it's saying reading the file and then outputting the word count and message sent, meaning that the message was sent to the Event Hub. So this is pretty handy for diagnosing failures if any of the tasks failed. So let's go to the Event Hub, and I'll show you that there are messages coming in to that Event Hub. So there's word counts. As you can see, yes, there are messages coming into that Event Hub, so the application is working. So let's talk about performance now. This table shows you the number of nodes versus the time taken to run the job. So with one node, it took 80 minutes to run to process those 1,000 files. With 3 nodes, it took 32 minutes, and with 6 nodes, it took 19 minutes. So not exactly linear, but fairly close. I mean, with you'll never get exactly linear time because of overhead, but it's pretty close to linear, which is good. And then here you can see the specs for the virtual machines that were being used. 1 vCPU, 2 gigabits of RAM, moderate network bandwidth, and 10 gig temporary SSD. And so even with this kind of minimal configuration, you know, it's still pretty good. So you could say if you expand to 10 nodes, you could probably do it in about 5 minutes or so. Okay, and so here's some development tips. I mentioned use the Azure Batch client library for .NET, especially if you need to do things with jobs and tasks. It's easier than the CLI. And if you're going to run a .NET console app on the nodes, publish it as a self-contained app, so you don't need to install .NET on the compute nodes. Cost. You pay for the virtual machines and storage like you normally would, and there's no additional cost for Azure Batch, which is good. And here are some resources. Microsoft Learn has some really good modules on Azure Batch, and that's what I started with, so I highly recommend you go through those tutorials. And of course, there's the Azure Batch documentation. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something about Azure Batch. And if you do like this video, please subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.